Okay, hello again, John. Just running through the ca3 code, what we used to write it. As I was saying, we used a similar method from the XML code, where we used the array list, and we came down, we imported the array list in here at the top, and we came in. The problem we had originally was we could obviously get to work with Paddy O'Shea as the hard-coded value here. The problem we had at first was to get the proper thing in here from our array list to get our values into the thing. So we went back up to the XML, looked at what we had done there with write character. We followed that template and we got that to work. We had a little bit of trouble with the IDs and integers, as I said to you in an email, that we were having trouble. The set values looking for a string, so we had to cast it to a string, and eventually that solved that. So you see, we only did the DGI and the PID. We also looked at PVI. I think I said that in the last slide, but it just didn't work out. We just didn't have the time. So just a quick overview of how we use the SNOMED codes within this system. We went off to a browser called Snowflake. We found specific SNOMED codes for some of the things we were looking at. We found one for general groin injury, which is kind of a catch-all term used by physios and by people in general in the media. You know, groin injury in itself can refer to many things in and around that general region, from the abdominals out to the hips down to into the upper leg. So it's a very, very catch-all type term. We found one groin disorder, and that's the 1180 code you see there. We found a more specific one for the OP. We call it pelvis there because it's maybe, you know, closer. You know, you're not necessarily going to have people come into the system with full-blown osteitis pubis. They might have trouble in that general area of the pelvis. So it's a more specific type of code. And then we found more generalized codes, I suppose, for other injuries. I mean, it is a situation where people are going to be coming in with more injuries than just groin or OP. So, you know, there's also others in there from the SNOMED codes. We use the SNOMED codes then to send out the ca3 messages. So wherever you have a diagnosis, whatever it is, that the ca3 message will correspond to that diagnosis. I suppose the good thing about SNOMED is that it gives you that standard terminology, i.e. the code. You know, for, as I said there a minute ago, groin is a very, very generic type of term. There's lots and lots of things that can be associated with that. You know, hip injury and all that sort of stuff. That there are, you know, they tend to be kind of a catch-all. You know, the underlying problem are so very, very specific, and particularly in the system that we're looking at there as regards, you know, homing in on root problems. You know, there are some areas in the problem identification table where you probably can get more specific than what we've even done. You know, but for example, in the root of problem identified, you know, the hip they're very, very, you know, still very general terms, even when you go into the, you know, inguinal ligaments and stuff like that, which can be the real problem. You know, so there are, you know, SNOMED terms for the likes of them, and I think that's where the use of this within our system could be quite useful, because you can gather statistical information on that, you know, based on those codes. As I say, you know, there is no, that's the thing about SNOMED, there is no ambiguity as regards what you mean. You know, I've seen a situation with this particular problem where, you know, they all seem to use the same sort of language, and you know, for example, Gilmore's groin and osteitis pubis and you know, hernias and things like that, they all seem to be fairly similar in their general diagnosis. They all seem to share a lot of similar problems. So, you know, I think, you know, particularly for the exchange of information about, you know, HL7 and patient appointments and all that, I think it's very, very important that you have that specific information, rather than just, you know, transferring knowledge from, you know, one person to another, you know, through a written note or something, that you have that specific code that goes with that information, so that people say, right, he does mean inguinal ligament, or he does mean osteitis pubis. He's not talking about Gilmore's groin. You know, they're all specific codes of their own. So I think that type of information is very important. That's where SNOMED is very good. It's, you know, language independent as such, that, you know, it should be able to travel the world. You know, it shouldn't be dependent upon culture or your understanding of words. And it's also extendable. You know, I think osteitis pubis, as far as I can see, is really an injury that, I suppose, to a certain extent is in its infancy of being solved, you know, as to what the problems are really about it. So I think it's a bit like the CJD thing with, I think that was ICD-10. I mean, you need to be able to extend these sorts of things in case, one day you find some sort of new variable that comes into the equation. I think osteitis pubis is possibly one of those injuries that someday somebody is going to say, well, this is what really causes it in the heat of the hunt. As I said, there's been a lot of work done on it in Australia, but I think it obviously hasn't transferred very well because people in Ireland are still very much struggling with, what it is, how to treat it, what are the early indications of it. A lot of that work has been done in Australia to a certain extent, but it hasn't been able to translate here because the terms that they're using are quite vague, and I think SNOMED, offers the opportunity to standardise those terms and to bring it all together a little bit. Okay, so how is all this useful to our system? I suppose in terms of interpretability between using HL7 and using the SNOMED codes, the main benefit I would see of it in terms of our system is that if somebody like David Ivers has to receive a patient, if he's able to look at a package of information that comes with that patient about, what their medical history is, who have they seen, what has been done with them, what treatments, what injuries have they got, what is their medical history in general, it's going to make his life an awful lot easier, so that he can look at that information, interpret it whatever way he wants. He knows the standard terminology, he knows what he's looking at, he's not trying to interpret, well, what did they mean by that, or what did they mean by this other word, so it's given him a point where he can use that, person's life, I suppose, in terms of medical information. You can use that to your advantage as a healthcare professional. It should be able to start him on, what do I need to do with this person, rather than the situation I explained earlier in the presentation, where you could, go through half a dozen physios, consultants, doctors, God knows what, and still kind of be at a situation where every time you show up on one of their doors, you have to go through the whole story, the problem. You probably pull out a file or two that's come from this guy, or a note that's written from this other fella, and it's all really a patchwork to put it all back together. And he really starts with his own, he starts from fresh to a certain extent, and you just feel like you're going round and round in circles. So I think to be able to have that information follow a patient, by the physiotherapist and the consultant exchanging information, I think is a very, very useful thing. I think on the other side of that, if someone like Mr. Ivers has to send a patient, off for the next stage of his treatment, maybe to a consultant, maybe off for an MRI or something like that, it smooths out that process again for the patient, but also for everyone involved. There's less administration, there's less of this kind of form filling in when you have to go and get your MRI, and again, it saves the time of the people that really need to do this. It gives them more time to, specifically work as consultants or work as healthcare professionals. Not people have to fill in forms and interpret data and all this sort of stuff. They can see a patient's medical history, they can evaluate whatever they want, and they can use that to move the treatment on to the next level. And I think we all would have complaints about the administration levels and all that sort of stuff that's in the health service, and these sorts of things could hopefully cut that down. The use of HL7, the use of standard terminology. I think it could also be important in terms of osteitis pubis for just, getting more information out there. As I said, if physios maybe that haven't come across this particular injury can see that this is in a patient's history, or that this is an issue affecting them, I mean, they can maybe go and learn about it, they can go and interpret statistics, they can go and do a little bit of research, because I think it seems to be kind of a thing at the moment where people are passing through physiotherapists' hands, and the word osteitis pubis is not even being mentioned. I think it's very, very important that, one of the things I would have said early on would have been that it's more important than anything to get word out about this particular, problem. And I think something like HL7, if it promotes that sharing, that, moving a patient's data around, I think it can only help, to broaden the horizons of every healthcare professional that patient particularly sees. It gets it out there, it gets that knowledge out there. Okay, so that brings us on really to security and trust, and I suppose trust is a big issue in all of this. I mean, if a physiotherapist has your information, do you really trust him that he will use that information in a positive manner, that he won't do something with it that you don't like, or share it with people that you don't want him to share it with? And I suppose that is the big issue when you talk about security and trust, that It's maybe alright when it's localised to maybe one physio, but when other people get involved in bigger clinics, you know, receptionists, secretaries, you know, nurse, all other people that can see this information, you know, when the likes of Ivers is sending this to a hospital or to a consultancy or whatever it may be, you know, other people are going to come into contact with the information, and that's when it gets a little bit sensitive. There's also probably an issue of, you know, malicious or not even malicious, you know, if someone, as I said, Mr. Ivers is a physio secretary, he does his own work, you know, if the cleaner or if burglars or God knows what gets into a system and has a look at that information, you know, do we trust that he has secured it in the proper way? Just on our particular system, we really only have a login for our system. As it stands at the moment, there's really only one person, you know, the physio is going to have access to that system, and he's going to have the password. And I suppose at another level, it's the system that we're talking about making, where, you know, that information is going to be interpreted in some way. You know, there is going to be an element of, you know, will the people coming into this system, you know, want the physio to interpret their data, and will they want to be maybe part of his journal findings at the end of the thing? And, you know, it's all a case of trusting, you know, that the person that's using it is not going to use it in a malicious way. Or so I suppose back to the issue of security, the main issue that, you know, this type of system is protected is going to be the private and public keys. And the public keys are going to be the ones that you're going to freely distribute to whoever it is that you want to be able to view this information, whether you're sending them you know, sharing documents with them, or files, or whatever it is that you want to share. And the private key then is going to be the level of access that only you have access to. So it all depends on how secure you really want to make that information that you're sharing with somebody. So the public key that you distribute can't actually be used to view the information that you have. They're going to need access to your private key to do that. So a third party having access to that public key doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to get at the information. They have a chance of doing so, but it's only a chance. So if we have to send information, we can send that information using the public key, in the knowledge that it doesn't really matter if anyone else has access to that public key. Whoever we're sending the message to will use their own private key to encrypt that, or sorry, to decrypt that message. So we're encrypting with the public key, and that information then will be decrypted by whoever's getting the message with the private key. So this basically means that when we're sending information, that there's no opportunity really for, you know, a third party, for someone to come in and steal that information. You know, with the other type of encrypting, symmetric encrypting that they used to use, there was an opportunity, because you have to exchange keys with somebody else if you wanted to share information with them. There's a chance that somebody could come in and steal that key. That can't really happen with, they can get access to your public key, alright, but that's still not going to be enough for them to decrypt the message.